Hello and welcome to what seems like a book video, but I suspect it's going to turn into a ramble about careers and programming and various other things, because that's just what I feel like doing. So it's been a little while since I've done what I think I am calling a book look. The last one, I believe, was the Tashin Tarot book. And prior to that, I've done a few Magic the Gathering books, I think. I think I did one on either Mirage or Tempest, the sort of player's guide that was released at the time. So I figured, seeing as this had just arrived this morning, it's probably a good idea to do a bonus video this week and do one that revolves around a book, amongst other things, because it's going to be a bit rambly, so I do apologise for that. But it's a good opportunity, I think, for me to talk a little bit about my career generally. It's not something I don't really talk a lot about on the channel, and anybody that's listened to my music podcast, which currently is on hiatus, I think I talk a little bit about jobs and careers and things like that, although I'm normally fairly artfully vague when I do stuff like that. So I thought this is a good opportunity to just ramble a little bit about programming and my own experience in learning how to program, and why I currently have this book. So it was on my doorstep this morning, rather conveniently. I'd just been out for my morning walk, as I like to do every day, and it was as a result of actually someone had gifted me an Amazon gift card, a relative, and I'd been waiting for the price of this book, including the sales tax on it, to fall below the value of the gift card, and that happened a few days ago. So I pulled the trigger on this. So we're going to talk a little bit about the book, but before we do that, I'm also going to talk a little bit about programming generally. So if I go back in time, my first introduction to the crazy world of programming would have been sometime in the very late 70s, I think. So I was fortunate enough to, when I was at school, the school for the first year ever did computer studies, and I got to learn at the time the language that was the introduction for beginners, which would have been BASIC, more specifically Commodore BASIC, because we had Commodore PETs. So I was taught that at school. I left school in the early 80s and went and worked in vitro diagnostics. I was really lucky. Back then, firms were really keen to send you to college. So not only did I get to work in a lab, which was my sort of, at the time, that's the sort of career I wanted to go into. In fact, I desperately at the time wanted to be involved in forensics. Now, this wasn't forensics, it was in vitro diagnostics to do with bacterial identification and also antimicrobic susceptibility. So basically looking at how much of a certain level of antimicrobic you need to basically kill a bacteria. And it was all done in something called microtiter plates, which I won't go into any great detail of. But over the course of that and how the technology evolved, that sort of technology moved into the world of rapid testing and fluorescent substrates, which meant, whereas previously everything had to be done by hand and by visually looking at the plates 24 hours after you'd incubated them, you could do it on a fluorescent reader in combination with fluorescent substrates, and not only do it within 24 hours using a semi-automated system when the computer would calculate the results for you, but also you could do a rapid ID in, say, 8 hours. And so what happened was, obviously at college I was studying initially chemistry because I worked in a prep lab, and then I moved into initially immunology, where I did a lot of specificity testing and purification of antibodies and antigens and serum, basically. And then I moved into quality control of these diagnostic and antimicrobial sensitivity products that I'd mentioned. And we obviously had a separate department there that would handle all the programming for the rapid identification and the fluorescent readers. But what happened was, when we worked in quality control, we generally used the software to do bacterial identification, to do the testing, which meant an awful lot of non-computing analysis of the data, because the software we were using was designed for end users. It wasn't designed for quality control purposes. So over time, because of not only I'd studied computer programming at school, but also when I was attending college doing initially for 2 years chemistry, and then for a further 2 years biochemical techniques in combination with some microbiology. I also continued with my programming during that phase. We had a couple of units on programming, again in BASIC, which I was really familiar with. So what ended up happening is we bought a couple of IBM clones for the lab, Amstrads. What were they, 1520s and 1640s? I think that's the model number, with hard cards in them. And I basically set them up and wrote programs to collect data, raw data from the fluorescent readers, and then to analyze the data. But additionally, and prior to that, we'd been doing a lot of document preparation work, and initially we were using word processors to do that, but I then went on to actually produce software which would produce documentation automatically, without you having to enter, without you having to use a word processor, by literally putting in certain pieces of information, and then it would create the document for you for quality control purposes. And so we were pretty heavily invested in IBM clones, and of course using, what was it, GW Basic originally, and then Q Basic, and then we went out and bought a quick basic compiler so that I could compile the actual software, and so the techs wouldn't start fiddling around with the code, because techs are inquisitive, even ones that don't know how to program. So I did that, worked in microbiology, immunology, quality control for around 12 years, working my way up the slippery pole. And then I got a bit bored with it. I was doing a lot of parallel work programming, doing process improvement using, software, writing code in primarily quick basic, but also I dabbled in things like, I think at the time, Snowball, and it was really funny, like early, I kick myself now not pursuing it, but early neural networks, back when it was hardware based. And so I remember taking a look. I'm trying to think of the other languages. I sort of dabbled a little bit with Snowball and Forth, I think. Though they're not necessarily AI languages. Python wouldn't have been a thing back then. It would have been Lisp. I've got a book on Lisp actually, which I'll get onto in a moment. Left there because I'd become a bit disillusioned. I find this reoccurring pattern, and my dad always jokes about. He always starts after I've been working for a firm about 10 years. He always says, "Oh, I think isn't it about time you left and went somewhere else?" Because that's normally what you always do. So after I left there, I decided that I was going to get a bit more invested in computing, but I didn't really know what to do because my qualifications mainly were in microbiology and chemistry and biochemical techniques, and the coding was a sort of internal side gig, if you like. That I wasn't a programmer, that wasn't my job title, but I did a lot of programming. And I think there's a lot of people out there like me that aren't employed as a programmer but do a lot of programming as a side gig within their own firm. And so I decided that I sort of wanted to get more into the programming and software and computing side of things. So what I did was I went and worked for went and worked in an office for a accounts firm and learned how to read an account sheet, and there I started dabbling in other languages through getting involved in various side projects again. So Visual Basic, a little bit of C, little bit of the back end to Borland, the database. Was it DB3, I think, at the time? So basically what was becoming, I think, termed 4GL, which were programming languages attached to databases. So things like VBA, which was attached to Access, and also learning Visual Basic in its own right, because I wanted to take some software that I'd written at my previous firm to do with bacterial identification, which I'd done as a side project, which was never picked up on, and I wanted to see how that looked in Windows, because previously all the stuff was in DOS and all command line stuff. So, got a bit more involved with that, and so we're talking here, this would have been around the early 90s, and so I decided at the time to do a postgraduate in computing and manufacturing whilst I was working. So there's this wonderful institution in the UK called the Open University, and after about, I think it was 2.5 years, I ended up with a joint postgraduate diploma in computing and manufacturing, of which a large chunk of it was things like object-oriented programming, small talk, intelligent systems analysis and design, relational database engineering. I wanted it to sort of maintain a bit of a link to business still. So the reason why it was computing and manufacturing is that I also did units on project management, quality management, quality methods, implementing new technologies, and bizarrely enough, polymer engineering, because I just thought it'd be really, really interesting to do. Now, I'm just looking to check I got that. Now, the polymer engineering one was funny because I thought it was going to be mainly chemistry, but it turned out to be really advanced mathematics and quite advanced physics. I'm good at maths, but for some reason I'm dreadful at physics. I don't know why, so that was a bit of a struggle. But I got through it all. Only had one reset, and funny enough, that was on the quality methods unit, which always makes me chuckle because that's that was my area of expertise after leaving the previous firm. So always be careful. don't assume you think you know what you know, because sometimes when you get tested on it, it can be proved otherwise. So yeah, finished that, and off the back of that, and doing various projects, working at this accounts office and being able to read an accounts balance sheet, I got a job for a value-added reseller, modifying basically 4GL code, and the programming language was something called Concord XAL, and that was really interesting, very challenging. I only stuck it out for about 18 months. I decided that I didn't really want to become a full-time programmer. I much preferred the idea of process improvement through the use of software, where you basically improved your immediate environment. I found that much more interesting and much more challenging and much more. It was great because you could come up with some excuse for using a certain language, whereas when I was working as a value-added reseller, I had to stick with the programming language. I think I got a chance to write a DLL in C one time for a sales demo to demonstrate some feature in the software which could integrate with DLLs, but that was about it. And so I stuck that out for 18 months, but it was very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a very high speed, high pressure environment in which I maintain. I probably learned about 5 years worth of stuff in about 18 months, because the firm I worked for insisted on choosing projects where the previous firm who was supposed to have done the coding seriously messed up. And so we ended up with all these coding projects from hell, where half the time we were writing code to repair the database damage that had been done by the previous firm. It was pretty hairy stuff. We were working on like live accounting systems, which you should never do. You should never do. But such was the damage that had been done by previous firms that was a necessity. And then after that, I worked for myself for 11 years as a troubleshooter and trainer. I taught coding for about a year at college. Specifically, it was actually web. Well, actually, it was on a HNC programming course, but I just taught the web component, like JavaScript, HTML, CSS. So that would have been, 2000s, sometime during there. But mainly, when I was lecturing, I was actually lecturing on information systems and management information systems, so fairly high level stuff. But it meant I was working for myself, but I was like employed on contract by the college. So it meant I was able to talk them into offering training modules to businesses. And so I got to write a lot of modules in technology, office programs, things like that. And so I was able to sort of sharpen my training skills as well at the same time. And, I mainly taught, like I say, management information systems and information management and project management for about 4 to 5 years, in parallel with doing, my own business of troubleshooting and training and advising various clients on, websites and prototyping a lot of stuff. So I didn't get too involved in the actual finished web design, but I would prototype up stuff for clients to give them a rough idea of what to expect before they went out to engage with a a full-blown web developer. So they actually had like a, if you like, a layout of what they wanted to show them, with some basic templates, some cursory maybe CSS stuff, and a few other things that and some color schemes as well, so we could do that. And in the lead into that, I did I don't know what it's called, a web applications development certificate with the Open University. So that had HTML in it, JavaScript, active server pages, Cold Fusion, MySQL, server balancing, and a few other things as well. I had to set up Apache servers. PHP was another thing we learned. That took about 2 to 3 years to do. It was done in small, very intense, 12-week courses spread over 2 to 3 years. And that was really useful and interesting. So when I came to Canada, I previously wrapped up my business, and then I went back working for firms again, or working for a firm again. Did that for 11 years, and then I suppose you could call it, I retired. I decided that I was going to step away, go into like a mini retirement for a while, and just reflect on what I'd learned. And during my time working for my most recent firm, I was mainly involved with support and training, so day-to-day support, but bits of that involved tweaking the odd bit of SQL, doing a bit of VBA coding in Office. What else? I'm trying to think. Scripting, PowerShell, those sort of things. Learning little bits about virtual machines. It all adds to the mixing pot. And then a couple of years before I decide to sort of take a form of retirement, I got interested again in maybe doing a bit more programming, just as a as a fun thing. If you think I do enjoy programming as a recreation, and I was trying to think how I could recapture that wonderful feeling of me. I remember sitting at my grandparents' kitchen table in the summer of, I don't know, it must have been the late 70s, one summer when we used to go over there, almost like it felt like the whole summer. We'd go off, visit my grandparents and stay for most of the summer holidays. And I remember sitting down with these sort of legal pads and just coding in my head and writing on paper. I didn't have an access to a computer outside of school, and initially we used to have to send our programs off to be processed by a mainframe by filling out data forms, like data sheets in pencil, and very straight characters. And so I was trying to recapture that feeling of beginner's mind and just being completely into it. And so I had a few false starts, mainly because, of course, I was doing this 2 years ago while I was still employed, and the job I was involved with, this support job, was really, high pressure, high volume of work, doing multiple jobs simultaneously, support, training, rolling out new machines. Anybody that's worked in IT will know your reward for hard work is more hard work, and if you're very efficient, they turn to you to become more efficient because you're good at it. So you end up in this sort of vicious circle. So I took a look at Clojure because I was interested in learning a language that might forced me to learn how to properly program functionally, in the same way that I found that when I learned Smalltalk back when I was doing object-oriented programming, it was really useful to be in a language where you couldn't program any way apart from object programming. So I thought, yeah, Clojure would be a good one to learn, and I struggled with it quite a bit, and then I sort of switched to F#, dabbled with that for a while, but again, we're talking about we're getting into COVID territory, so things just went crazy, and I was working at that point, working remotely, and we were having to roll out a massive amount of laptops as well, so everything got put on the back burner. So fast forward to today, and I've now been retired for about a year, call it that. I mean, it's not, strictly speaking, I'm doing a lot of projects, as you know, from my web channel, and still, looking to get back into some form of what's the word? Not occupation, but yeah, just something I can, get my teeth into, and a few projects, a few new projects, and it's been nice to work on stuff that's been on the back burner for a while. And one of them is, as I'm getting to here, it's been a very long ramble here, 26 minutes, and we haven't even opened the book. But anyway, I thought it'd be a good, think of this as a sort of one-sided Ask Me Anything about career. So yeah, so we're now on to this, and I'd been going through, so what happened was I'd taken a look at Stack Overflow and their interesting, like, yearly what would you call them, their surveys, which are really interesting. If you get a chance to check out the Stack Overflow surveys, do, because they're really revealing. So I was particularly interested in a couple of their things from 2021. The 2022 one is still being collected. I don't know quite when they go out. Is it July? I think is normally when they finish, but I could be wrong. Anyway, so I've got 2021, and I'm always curious about the top paying technologies, not because I want to go back into full-time programming again. I just want to dabble for initially recreationally, but then find out if I can use it to create some useful little apps here and there, little utilities that I might find useful. But I'm always fascinated by the top paying technologies one, because you get all these curious languages coming up, which are clearly pay well, but aren't always like the most popular technology. And the reason why they pay well is because they're not the most popular one. There's not a lot of people that are trained in them. So I noticed, this is the list here. So Clojure, F#, Elixir, Erlang, Perl, Ruby, Scala, Rust, and then Go. And we get into Lisp and APL and so on. And then there's the most popular technologies, and anybody that's been involved in programming will probably smile at this list. It's the usual suspects. So JavaScript, HTML / CSS, SQL, Python, TypeScript, which is a subset of JavaScript that's a little bit more sort of tighter. Node.js, Java, C#, and then, funnily enough, Bash Shell. What this is, if you're wondering, is I worked out what I did a little Pareto analysis and worked out what the top 20% of the list was. That's what that's all about. So then what I did was I started to compare years, and it was interesting. So by doing that, I ended up with a top 10 summary of 2017 to 2021. You can go back further than 2017, but the trouble is the report is sufficiently different once you get back that far that it gets difficult to cross-compare some of the categories. You can, but it's tricky, and I wanted to keep it simple. So this is the top paying technologies, by the way, and you can see how these line up. So I then ended up with this top 10 based on where for the previous 5 years certain languages had appeared in the list. And so we've got in order of most appearances and highest up the list. We've got Clojure, F Sharp, Rust, Perl, Go, Scala, Elixir, Ruby, Erlang and Groovy. And the year they were released, that is there, because I was curious about when the program was released. Now, the star is important because that's one where the programming language is in every top 10 every year from 2017 to 2021. And that is Rust, Go, Scala, Ruby. And you can sort of see where I'm going with this. What was interesting was that how for 2020, and I don't know what happened, both Clojure and F Sharp just dropped out of the top 10. Just nowhere to be seen. And Perl went to the top. In actual fact, last year sometime, I took another look at Perl for a brief period of time. It is something actually I had dabbled in around the same time I was doing my web applications development program. So finally onto the book, but yeah, this episode really wasn't just about the book. But before I mention that, a couple of other things. This is an old book now, but this is what sort of broke me out from being mainly, just knowing the code that I knew at the time, which was Visual Basic, and I'd sort of gone into learning a little bit of C and a little bit of assembly language. But this really opened my eyes. It's quite an old book now. It's from '93, but it did introduce me, although I'd heard about them when I was doing computer studies originally, things like Lisp. And as a consequence from that book, I started actually, getting the odd older computer manual as well. And at some point I should go through some of my older computer books. Some people might find it interesting. So, onto the Rust programming language. So this is No Starch Press. It's authored by Steve Klabnik and Carol Nichols, although there are quite a few contributions in here from the Rust community. It covers Rust 2018. I did watch a recent video by Carol Nichols. I think that was the one I'm thinking of. It was very interesting. I learned a lot about the railroad, if I've got the video right, actually. It was an interesting sort of preamble about the early development of the railroad and the deaths of brake operators. And it was basically, just an analogy about changing, how people are loath to change things, because part of the talk was sort of comparing moving from C to moving to Rust. And I'm really looking forward to going through this book cover to cover. You can see here we've got what's that, 20 chapters. So I'm going to start off myself going through this, trying to do a chapter a week and see how I get on. I also have already set up a programming environment. I've started doing this thing now. I'm pretty much exclusively a Windows user. I do occasionally spin up the odd Unix virtual machine, and I have dabbled in Mac OS as well back in the day when I used to help a client with video editing. But most of my experience is with Windows and, well, prior to that actually DOS back in the day. So what I've started getting into the habit of doing is to sort of contain everything is actually setting up a standard, like a single account in Windows, or additional account in Windows, sorry, that's purely dedicated to learning the language. So I've just created an account called Rust, downloaded, installed the Rust software, and made sure all the prerequisites are there, make sure that the Visual C++ library is there, and the tools that they advise you, and also got a copy of Visual Studio, which I already had. I managed to break my copy of Atom trying to get the Rust language support installed on that. So I've got to take a look back at that, but I'm going to be using, I think, Visual Code to do this. And obviously I'm going to be using Cargo as well, and get into how to use that. So that leads into my next question, which is, I don't know how many people are interested in me doing some videos on programming. I'm probably going to do some anyway, just as a way to force myself to learn things and to keep on target with this. But I'm just curious as to how many of my viewers out there have either, are interested in programming or have a background in programming, or, like I'm starting to do now, just getting back into just coding as a recreation and then just seeing where it takes me. I'm hoping to come up with some sort of template for learning any new programming language. Part of where I want to go with this is to sort of draw on my experience as a teacher and a trainer, and just put together some materials and try and come up with a framework, like a learning framework that you can sort of apply to different programming languages, and just see how I do. So I'm just flicking through this so you can just get a rough idea of the layout of the book. Historically, I've tended to gravitate towards the sort of O'Reilly books, the ones with the animals on them. That was just because that's what I first became exposed to as a publisher who had a uniform look and feel to their programming books. And then I sort of moved over to more Peach Pit, because that was the books generally that the Open University were using on a lot of their courses. And then now I've become aware of, obviously, No Starch Press as well. And over the years, on and off, I've had a subscription to O'Reilly, which I found really useful, although more off than on, because it is fairly expensive. But if you do consume a lot of programming books, then it's definitely worth paying the subscription. And also I did subscribe to, I think, Pact, whose books actually are included in O'Reilly, but Pact have their own subscription service, which is considerably cheaper, but only, I think, features just the Pact books. And I did subscribe to that for a couple of months. Now, of course, I do accept that an awful lot of learning materials and manuals are actually just on the internet for free. I noticed that the Closure, what's that one? Something like Closure for the Brave and True, I think it's called. The whole book is available through the author on the web. But often when I'm learning, I like to invest in some way. And one of those ways I invest is I try and buy a book by someone that's either involved directly with the language as part of the community, or is the person that's wrote the language. So I've got in my library of classic books, I've got the the classic C book and the classic C++ book. A few of the other languages that I've got my eye on owning books for. Some of the prices are pretty astronomical. I was looking at an Algol 68 hardback edition of one the other day, and it was pretty pricey. I don't have an Algol 68 book in my collection, but I did see another one, which I won't mention in case anybody goes on and starts buying it up for a language, which was an older book, and that was pretty reasonably priced. There was a second-hand copy of it for quite a good price. So I'm always looking at ways of slowly expanding on my classic software manual, whatever you want to call them, books. Sorry, I was distracted by hash maps. Yeah, it's always interesting to see in a language how things like lists, arrays, how data, generally actually how data structures are handled. That's always really fascinating. It's always funny when I think back to learning BASIC. You can be pretty fast and loose in there. And then when you move into other languages, you have to sort of develop fairly, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a bit more of a, I don't know, robust is the right word, but certainly you become a bit more aware of typing and other things, which maybe didn't matter quite so much when I would remember learning Commodore Basic back in the day, and then moving over to GW, Whiz Basic and Q Basic. It was easy to develop bad programming techniques, and falling into certain things which are considered to be not good. The other thing that also fascinates me, is in certain programming languages, these idioms that you find. People talk about code being Pythonic or Clajorian, and that's something that's definitely worth investigating. So I'm going to just draw this ramble to a close. It's been a bit more about me and my exposure to programming languages than really about this book. But just let me know in the comments section your own feelings on coding, where you are in your coding sort of experience or not, or whether you're interested in learning more about programming, whether it's something that you sort of videos you'd certainly watch if I was to produce them. So let me know. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. I'll see you in the next video. And if you're in Canada, enjoy the long Victoria Day weekend. Bye for now.